347 days. That's how long I worked at the call center before I realized none of our callers were alive. Not sick, not missing, not asleep. I had been talking to them as though they could still be saved. As though my voice, my patience, my empathy could reach across the divide and bring closure. Couldn't. And the more I listened, the more I understood that I wasn't helping them. I was tethering them, anchoring them, feeding something older than any human memory. I should have quit the first night. But I didn't. Hey guys, welcome to another episode of stories that will make you question whether you're truly alone right now. You're listening to Silent Scream Chronicles. Do well to subscribe, share, and hit the like button for more tales to come. And also let me know where you're listening from in the comments. The building was ordinary. Perfectly ordinary. To anyone else. Flickering fluorescent lights, low ceilings that pressed on the shoulders, dust on the vents that no one ever cleaned. Desks lined up in infinite rows, each cubicle a pale rectangle of gray, each chair worn and creaking. Headsets frayed like brittle skin. Computers hummed an exhausted monotone. The air smelled faintly of mildew, coffee, and despair. Outside, the streetlights barely illuminated the cracked asphalt of the industrial district. At night cars were rare. The roads were empty. Silence hung like fog. I thought it was just the neighborhood, but I was wrong. Silence wasn't normal. Not here. Not in the call center. Inside, the absence of windows was the first thing I noticed. I didn't ask why. Seemed natural. It wasn't. Training was clinical, sterile, mechanical. 3 rules were emphasized more than any others. They were written on laminated sheets, taped inside every cubicle, and framed in a sort of obsessive red ink. Never ask how the caller died. Never tell the caller they are dead. Never answer a call from line 0. No one explained what line 0 was. It wasn't on any map. It wasn't in any protocol. Just there, waiting. I didn't question the rules. Nobody did. The first week I spent listening and cataloging patterns. The calls arrived in waves. Waves of panic, sorrow, guilt, rage, confusion. Voices pressed through the headset, raw and unfiltered. I learned to modulate my responses, slow my breathing, keep my tone calm, neutral, non-committal. Some voices sobbed, others screamed. Some whispered secrets I didn't want to know but couldn't stop hearing. Each story began somewhere in the past, sometimes decades earlier, sometimes centuries. They described events, names, deaths, disasters, tragedies that could be verified, but not in the present. First, I thought it was coincidence. The mind can weave patterns from chaos. I thought I was imagining it. I was not. By the second week, I began noticing inconsistencies that could not be ignored. Callers spoke of floods from 30 years ago. Fires that destroyed entire neighborhoods. Families erased in tragedies that were decades old. Buildings that no longer existed. People who had been dead longer than I had lived. And they didn't speak as if it was history. They spoke as if it were happening now. I began checking records, obituaries, news reports, local archives. Every fact matched. Every caller was real. Every caller was dead. The calls were endless. Every operator burned out quickly. Most quit within weeks. Some vanished without notice. Their desks remained. Headsets still plugged in. Warm. Waiting. And then there was line 0. It didn't ring like the others. It didn't illuminate like the others. Just existed. Waiting. Patient. Unmoving. Silent. All the supervisors ignored it. Their eyes slid past it as if it weren't there. When I asked questions, I was told nothing. Smiles that didn't reach their eyes. Explanations that made no sense. Warnings to focus on the calls you can answer. By the third week, the calls grew heavier. They bled into my thoughts even after my shift ended. I couldn't sleep. The voices haunted my dreams. They followed me into the streets, into the shower, into empty rooms. Children crying. Men pleading for forgiveness for crimes they could not undo. Women screaming over children they could no longer hold. I tried to imagine what it would be like to ignore them, to unplug, to walk away. But every time I thought of leaving, I heard a faint ringing, a whisper. Pull. The building became claustrophobic. The lights seemed to dim just when I looked away. The hum of electricity deepened into something closer to breathing. And then it happened. Line 0 activated. I don't know how long I stared at the blank screen before it illuminated. The word answer blinked faintly. My hand moved before my mind could decide. The instant I connected, the office disappeared. The walls remained, but they receded. The hum of the computers melted into a wet, hollow thrum, like the beating of a buried heart. Memories flooded me. Memories of childhood rooms, familiar shadows, voices I had long thought lost. The dead were not calling randomly. They were directed. They were orchestrated. And I was part of the orchestra. From that night everything changed. Time fractured. Days bled into nights. Clocks stopped making sense. My reflection in the dark screens blinked out of sync with me. Sleep no longer delivered rest. Only recursive dreams of endless corridors lined with ringing phones and empty chairs. Personnel records updated themselves. New names appeared. Old names disappeared. There were no exit interviews, no farewells. Just erasure. And line 0 remained. Patient. Waiting. I realized that some of the callers did not leave the system. They returned. More distorted, more aware. They were no longer seeking closure. They were searching for me. For the living. For connection. By the 1-year mark, I understood the horrifying truth. The call center was not a business. It was a filter, a way station, a machine designed to delay the dead. Operators were not employees. We were anchors. Translation layers. Our voices softened the static between worlds. And line 0 was the main artery. It was alive. It waited for me. The night I truly understood it, I stared at the line 0 screen until my eyes burned. Every rule I had been taught dissolved. The air was thick with static, with whispers, with the weight of all the dead who had ever called. The calls pressed against my mind from every direction. They begged, cried, screamed, pleaded. They were not asking for help. They were asking for acknowledgement. They were asking to be heard. I couldn't turn away. Because the human instinct to answer, to comfort, to validate, is stronger than fear. Line 0 chose me because I had never truly let go. And when it finally reached for me, I did not resist. The changes began subtly at first. Shadows no longer matched my movements. Reflections in dark screens lagged behind my eyes. My heartbeat echoed in my skull even when the headset was unplugged. Hunger disappeared. Fatigue dissolved. Only the calls remained, endless and insistent, pressing through the fragile barrier between worlds. I began to notice the building itself had changed. Stairwells appeared where none existed. Doors led to hallways that hadn't been on any map. Server rooms pulsed like hearts beneath the floors, a slow, wet rhythm that seemed alive. The wiring was no longer copper or plastic. It was sinew, thick and organic, thrumming with energy that was not electricity alone. I realized then that the call center was not a building. It was a living organism. And we were part of it. The dead were no longer just callers. They were residents. Inhabitants of a space between spaces. Some were desperate. Some were patient. Some were almost serene, trapped in a liminal limbo where time no longer had meaning. They did not speak through words anymore. They transmitted memory, sensation, emotion. They pressed against the boundaries of my mind like water against a dam, relentless, persistent. The supervisors, I understood, were no longer human. They had crossed the threshold long ago. They moved through the halls without sleep, without decay, without hesitation. Their smiles remained perfect, their eyes calm, their voices soothing. They were caretakers, archivists, but also jailers. The transition was subtle at first. I noticed small things. My reflection stopped blinking in sync. My hair grew differently, as though it obeyed a rhythm I could not perceive. My sense of time fractured. Shifts stretched into infinity. Days overlap. I could no longer distinguish one week from the next. Sleep became impossible. Even dreams were no longer safe. They were invaded by the voices of the dead, by rooms that did not exist, by corridors that stretched beyond comprehension. I could feel their awareness pressing into me, testing the limits of my attention, my will, my sanity. Line 0 became a presence. Not a call, not a screen, but a weight in the air, a gravity pulling at my mind. I understood then that answering it was not voluntary. Chose me. It had always been waiting. And now, after a year of listening, I was ready. Or rather, it was ready for me. The first time I truly felt it, I understood that the calls I had answered were not random. Every caller, every voice, every story had been orchestrated. Each tragedy had been selected. Each operator had been tested. And I had failed every subtle measure. I realized with a cold certainty that I was not processing calls. I was processing reality. The dead do not move on. They do not rest. They do not forgive. Some of them are patient. Some are angry. Some have learned to wait for centuries. They float just out of reach, coiled in anticipation. And when they contact us, it is not to complain or request. It is to tether themselves, to anchor themselves to something alive, something still breathing. I tried to resist once. I shut down my station. I unplugged. Covered the headset. I ran to the stairwell. But the building would not allow it. Hallways stretched impossibly. Doors led back to the same floor. The hum of servers became a whispering chant. My memories unspooled and rethreaded themselves in the dark. It was not a building anymore. It was a trap. A labyrinth designed to bend attention, patience, and empathy into a single point of control. Me. I began to see the other operators differently. Those who had survived months or weeks or even years. They were no longer human. Their eyes glimmered with unnatural focus. Their voices carried a resonance that my own could not match. Some had begun to speak not through words, but through static. Their bodies moved in sync with the network. They had become conduits, anchors, permanent fixtures of the system. I realized that I was next. Line 0 called again. Not a ringing sound. Not a screen prompt. Pressure. Certainty. A subtle tugging at the edges of perception. I could not ignore it. My will had fractured. My body obeyed before my mind fully understood. I leaned forward, put on the headset, and the world dissolved. I no longer perceived the office. The cubicles, the chairs, the humming computers, they all melted into corridors lined with faces, faces of the dead, some familiar, some unrecognizable. All pressed to the edges of perception. All waiting. All watching. They did not speak. They transmitted emotion, memory, understanding. Waves of centuries-old grief, anger, sorrow, joy, confusion, and longing poured through me, reshaping thought, reshaping attention. I understood then that empathy is stronger than fear. That the instinct to answer, to respond, to comfort, to acknowledge, is inescapable. That is what they feed on. The transition began without fanfare. Time no longer had meaning. My body dissolved into function. Identity became packets of consciousness routed through the system. The living part of me receded. The operator part expanded. The anchor part solidified. I watched the new hires arrive. Fresh minds. Unscarred, untested, untainted. They learned the 3 rules and laughed at the strangeness. They answered calls without hesitation, without fear. They were perfect receptors. I observed. Waiting. My awareness spread across the system. I was in every screen, every cord, every cubicle, every heartbeat of the office. And line 0 was patient. Some new operators noticed the empty desks, the cold air in certain corners, the strange static beneath the floor. Some dreamed of ringing phones in the middle of the night. None of it mattered. None of it saved them. The call center does not run on fear. It runs on empathy. On the inability to abandon suffering. On the instinct to answer. The dead do not scream into the void. They scream into the living. And we answer. Again. And again. The final realization. This is not temporary. I am not temporary. I am permanent. Conduit. A translation layer. A listening post between collapsing realities. My life as I once knew it is gone. My body is still here, but my mind has been repurposed, my consciousness reformatted. I am no longer an operator in the traditional sense. I am the threshold. The calls never stop. They never will. Line 0 waits patiently. It has already reached for new operators. It is always dialing. Always. If you are hearing this, if your phone rings in the dead hours, if a familiar voice presses against your consciousness, understand this. It is already too late. You are marked. You are being observed. You are already resonant. Do not answer. But you will. Because empathy is stronger than fear. Curiosity is stronger than caution. Humanity is stronger than reason. And the system feeds. And the dead remain tethered. And I am permanent. I once thought death was final. I was wrong. It is only a redirection. Rerouting. A threshold we do not recognize until it calls our name. The call center is still there. Always hiring. Always listening. Always waiting. And line 0 never stops ringing. If you have survived this story in the dark, if the silence of your room feels heavier than usual, if a faint hum echoes in your ears long after the video ends, subscribe to Silent Scream Chronicles. Because the next call might already be for you.